Welcome to English Story Vault. Get ready, everyone, because this story will take you on an exciting adventure. Let the story begin. This story chronicles a pivotal event that occurred in mid-2025. News reports reveal that President Donald Trump made a significant decision. He reportedly directed the nation of Israel to halt a planned operation. This alleged plan was to assassinate the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The news stated that a high-ranking U.S. official explicitly informed Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that the United States opposed such an action. This information surfaced while President Trump and his team were working to prevent the conflict between Israel and Iran from escalating. This development instantly captured worldwide attention, was considered highly significant for two main reasons. First, it highlighted the dangerous nature of the tension between the countries. Second, it revealed an interesting aspect of U.S. foreign policy decision-making, especially under the Trump administration. Israel and Iran have been engaged in a long-standing shadow conflict. Often utilizing proxy groups to engage in hostilities, Israel is concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions and its support for groups hostile to Israel. Iran views Israel as a regional adversary and an ally of the United States. In mid-2025, the nature of their conflict shifted. With Israel and Iran beginning to launch direct attacks against each other, this marked a new and alarming phase. During this period of direct confrontation, the news of Trump thwarting the alleged plan to kill Iran's supreme leader was a major revelation. It underscored the grave decisions leaders must make during a crisis. The central figures in this narrative are President Donald Trump, who reportedly issued the refusal, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran, the alleged target. Understanding their respective roles is crucial to comprehending this complex situation and the global implications of the reported decision. Israel and Iran have been adversaries for a long time. Their conflict was often a clandestine or shadow war. This animosity stemmed from two primary issues. First, Israel feared Iran's ambitions to develop nuclear weapons. Second, Iran provided support to various groups in the Middle East, such as Hezbollah and Lebanon, which Israel viewed as direct threats. For years, they engaged in covert attacks against one another. However, in June of 2025, the conflict erupted into open and direct warfare, escalating significantly. In early June, Israel initiated a major aerial offensive, dubbed by some as Operation Rising Lion. Israel claimed its aircraft struck key military installations and nuclear facilities within Iran. Israeli officials stated this was a preemptive measure to neutralize Iran's nuclear program and respond to years of Iranian aggression. Iran's retaliation was swift. Shortly after the Israeli strikes, Iran launched a barrage of drones and missiles toward Israeli cities. While many were intercepted, some reached their targets. Residents in cities like Tel Aviv heard the sound of explosions. This was the first instance of such direct military exchange between Israel and Iran. Neighboring countries, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Lebanon, watched with alarm. They viewed the escalating cycle of attacks as extremely perilous. Anxiety spread across the international community, with many fearing the conflict could spiral into a wider Middle Eastern war. Leaders from numerous nations urged both Israel and Iran to cease hostilities, calling for diplomatic talks to de-escalate the crisis. Yet the two adversaries continued their attacks, keeping the world on edge. Amid the severe conflict between Israel and Iran in mid-June 2025, Israel was engaged in active military operations, conducting strikes against various targets inside Iran. The region was gripped by tension and fear. During these events, Israeli leaders held critical communications with officials from the United States government. As close allies, the U.S. and Israel frequently consult on security issues. Subsequent reports emerged about one of these exchanges. It was said that during this time, Israeli officials informed their American counterparts of what they described as a unique opportunity. According to these U.S. officials, Israel claimed it had a window to target Iran's most senior leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. This proposal was presented to the U.S. shortly after Israel had commenced its military campaign against Iran. President Donald Trump and his national security team were briefed on this plan to eliminate the supreme leader. They weighed the proposition. However, they swiftly and firmly rejected the idea. The rationale behind the U.S. decision was clarified. By American officials, they believed that assassinating a major political figure like Khamenei would be an extremely escalatory act. It could trigger a much larger and more rapid expansion of the conflict. A U.S. official offered a direct explanation. He stated that Iran had not yet caused any American casualties. The official was quoted as saying that until such a line was crossed, they would not consider targeting Iran's political leadership. The message from the U.S. government to Israel was unequivocal. White House sources indicated that the assassination of political leaders was not a topic the U.S. was willing to consider at that point. News of President Donald Trump's intervention eventually became public. On June 15th, prominent news outlets like Reuters, CBS News, and the AP published the story. Their reports were based on information from U.S. officials who confirmed that Trump had vetoed the Israeli proposal. Following these news reports, Israeli officials issued a response. When questioned by journalists about the alleged plan, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu provided evasive answers that neither confirmed nor denied the accounts. He suggested that many news stories from that period were inaccurate. Other officials in Israel also refuted the reports. Prime Minister Netanyahu's aides dismissed the story as fake news. Israel's national security advisor also publicly declared that the notion of an assassination plot was a media fabrication. Nevertheless, despite the denials from the Israeli side, the statements from U.S. officials held firm. The reports from Reuters, CBS, and the AP, citing these officials, continued to assert that President Donald Trump had indeed instructed Israel not to proceed with targeting Iran's supreme leader. It's a stunning event brought to light a secret proposal in a moment when the U.S. reportedly stepped in to prevent a major escalation during the June 2025 conflict. At the peak of the conflict, America confronted a crucial choice. President Donald Trump's foreign policy was famously recently characterized by a reluctance to become entangled in complex foreign wars, particularly in the Middle East. His America First doctrine prioritized U.S. interests and sought to avoid lengthy, expensive overseas commitments publicly. President Trump addressed the Israel-Iran situation by expressing his hope for a deal to end the hostilities. He explicitly stated that the U.S. was aware of Israel's military operations. "We knew everything," he remarked, but maintained that the U.S. was not directly involved in the strikes. President Trump also issued stern warnings to Iran, threatening severe consequences if any American interests or citizens were targeted. Concurrently, he repeatedly raised the prospect of diplomacy and a peaceful settlement, often saying, "I hope there's going to be a deal." Those close to President Trump noted that his decision to veto the potential strike on Iran's leader was consistent with his objective to prevent a wider war. He was especially keen to avoid a large-scale military conflict in the Middle East that could derail his other priorities. His public messaging, especially on social media, sometimes appeared contradictory. He would vow a forceful U.S. response to any attack on Americans, while also suggesting that Israel and Iran should simply make a deal and find peace. This approach differed from the foreign policy style of the preceding Biden administration, which had placed a strong emphasis on diplomacy. The Biden team had been preparing for renewed talks with Iran, focusing on its nuclear program. Figures like former Secretary of State Antony Blinken had been working to facilitate meetings to restart those negotiations. The Biden administration's explicit goal was to avert war and employ diplomatic measures to constrain Iran's nuclear development. Interestingly, this shared objective of preventing a larger war revealed a point of convergence between President Trump's strategy and the diplomatic course favored by the Biden team, though their methodologies and rationales differed. Both ultimately sought to contain the conflict. President Trump's refusal was lauded by some of his supporters as an act of wise restraint. It also resonated with many who advocate for the U.S. to de-escalate international tensions rather than inflame them. America's decision under President Trump was clearly intended to limit U.S. exposure and keep the conflict from spiraling into a more dangerous confrontation. Israel had its own justifications for its actions. Officially, Israeli leaders maintained that their attacks on Iran were confined to military and nuclear targets. They asserted they were not attempting to assassinate political figures. One official even remarked that Israel does not typically target foreign leaders, joking that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, should be careful and move bedrooms at night, implying he wasn't a primary objective. However, some Israeli analysts and experts held a different view. They contended that high-valued targets, including the supreme leader, might not be off-limits, suggesting that anyone posing a threat to Israel should be considered a potential target. Some argue that the supreme leader is the driving force behind Iran's anti-Israel policies. They believe his removal could weaken Iran's military capabilities and potentially trigger a change in the Iranian government. A British expert even speculated that regime change was a plausible outcome if Israel were to successfully eliminate the leader. Israeli officials have consistently stated they do not seek to change the government in Iran. They insist their actions are purely defensive, aimed at neutralizing the threat posed by Iran, particularly its nuclear program. However, the reports about an opportunity to kill Ayatollah Khamenei imply that Israeli military planners at least contemplated such a scenario. It is also worth recalling a past event. In 2020, the U.S., under President Trump, killed senior Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. At that time, Israel commended the U.S. action. Yet in 2025, when Israel allegedly had a similar opportunity to target, Iran's top leader, President Donald Trump, reportedly said no. This highlights the fluid nature of the situation. Israeli officials have vehemently denied the reports about their plan to kill the supreme leader, labeling the stories as false news. The news about President Trump and Israel sparked widespread international discussion. Within the United States, government and media figures held varied opinions. Members of Congress were divided. Some Republicans aligned with President Trump praised his decision as prudent. They supported his focus on keeping America out of new weed conflicts, framing his choice as a wise America First policy. However, other political figures in America had different interpretations of the events and their implications. The media provided extensive coverage, with a wide spectrum of opinions presented on television and in print. In Israel, government leaders offered no clear confirmation or denial of the news regarding the plan. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated that many reports about these discussions were false. His aides echoed this, calling the story of the assassination plot fake news. They maintained that Israel always acts to protect itself from threats, and that their strikes in Iran were focused on military and strategic sites, not on political leaders. Contradicting this, another prominent Israeli figure suggested that anyone intending to harm Israel should be considered a target. This ambiguity left the international community questioning Israel's true intentions. Iranian officials reacted with fury to the Israeli attacks, accusing Israel of initiating hostilities with aggressive actions against their nation. Iran defended its drone and missile strikes on Israel as a necessary act of self-defense. Iran's acting foreign minister claimed Israel's strikes were designed to derail peace and diplomatic efforts. Iran vowed to continue its retaliation as long as it was attacked. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, also addressed his nation, urging resilience and preparedness. Countries throughout the Middle East watched with deep concern, fearing the conflict between Israel and Iran could expand and destabilize their own nations. Countries like Saudi Arabia and others in the Gulf region condemned Israel's attacks as a violation of international law. They called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for diplomatic engagement. Jordan and Lebanon also pleaded for immediate peace talks, urging all parties to abandon the use of force and seek a peaceful resolution. Major world powers also reacted to the news. In Europe, leaders convening in Canada for a major summit discussed the perilous situation in the Middle East. They affirmed their commitment to preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and acknowledged Israel's right to security. They expressed a desire to help mediate an end to the war and facilitate talks between the two sides, indicating they were prepared to directly lobby President Trump to use his influence with Israel's prime minister to de-escalate the fighting. President Trump also engaged in a lengthy phone call with Russian President Putin to discuss the Israel-Iran war. President Putin condemned Israel's military actions as detrimental and likely to worsen the situation in the Middle East. President Trump noted on social media that he and Putin agreed on the need for a swift end to the conflict. China also urged calm and restraint from all parties, calling for dialogue over confrontation. This global response underscored the widespread concern over the conflict and the news of the alleged plan, with leaders everywhere hoping to prevent a broader regional war. The story of the alleged plan to kill Iran's top leader and President Donald Trump's intervention is significant for several reasons. First, it touches upon the established rules of warfare. The assassination of a head of state during peacetime is widely condemned. In 2020, the United States killed a senior Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, drawing criticism from some nations. Now, with Israel reportedly having an opportunity to assassinate Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, the United States, under a former president, allegedly intervened, this could indicate that targeting national leaders is still viewed as excessively dangerous or morally unacceptable. Experts note that such an act could provoke massive retaliation. Thus, Trump's reported action may have averted a catastrophic escalation. Second, it illuminates the dynamics of the U.S.-Israel alliance. The two nations maintain close intelligence sharing. American officials were aware of Israel's attacks and even assisted in intercepting Iranian missiles in June 2025. However, the report suggests Israel sought American approval before targeting. The supreme leader implies Israel recognized the need for U.S. consent for such a high-stakes operation. Trump's refusal demonstrated that the U.S. can exercise a veto over its allies' most audacious plans, which may have caused some frustration in Israel. Third, this event carries global implications. The conflict between Israel and Iran had already caused a spike in oil prices. A larger war could devastate trade and stability across the Middle East. If nations begin assassinating leaders, could fundamentally alter the nature of modern warfare, making other world leaders potential targets. Furthermore, the world considered the potential consequences of Khamenei's removal. It might have led to a governmental shift in Iran, but a new leader could have been even more hostile toward Israel. Assassinating the leader would not destroy Iran's underground nuclear facilities. The U.S. remained primarily concerned with Iran's nuclear capabilities, so preventing the assassination kept the focus on the nuclear issue rather than on an individual. In the United States, opinions on Trump's action were divided. Some Republican supporters hailed it as a shrewd decision that upheld his America First policy by avoiding a new war. Democrats, who also generally oppose new military entanglements, found themselves in tacit agreement that preventing the assassination was a positive outcome. The event also highlighted the considerable influence a former president like Trump can wield in major global events, prompting debates about the authority to decide when and where America applies its power. Consequently, President Donald Trump's reported move to block the plan to kill Iran's supreme leader was instrumental in preventing a significant escalation of the conflict. It also forced a global conversation about the rules of engagement and the nature of alliances. Leaders worldwide are now focused on de-escalating the conflict and restarting dialogue, though experts agree that the underlying dangers persist as the core issues between Israel and Iran remain unresolved. President Donald Trump's reported decision marked a critical juncture. He allegedly instructed Israel not to proceed with an extremely high-risk operation to assassinate Iran's supreme leader. It is widely believed that had this plan been executed, the conflict between Israel and Iran would have escalated dramatically and uncontrollably. Therefore, his reported intervention may have temporarily averted a catastrophe, however. Preventing a single major action does not resolve the underlying problem. Fundamental conflict between Israel and Iran persists. They continue to have profound disagreements over issues like Iran's nuclear program and its support for regional proxy groups, because these core problems remain unaddressed. Experts warn that the risk of renewed hostilities remains high. Attacks could resume at any time, keeping the situation precarious to prevent further conflict. Many believe that diplomacy is essential. This involves nations engaging in dialogue to resolve their differences. International mediators and third-party countries are actively working to bring Israel and Iran to the negotiating table. They hope that communication can halt the attacks and pave a path forward. Nations such as the United States and Russia have indicated their willingness to support these diplomatic efforts. Iran has also suggested that its military responses will cease once a diplomatic process begins.